it was such an uncomfortable watch. You think about Lewandowski up front, an iconic centre forward, a brilliant player, and he's just doing doggies.
But this guy, like, he was definitely speaking in Arabic, and like, he was really full on intense. But then he'd take his break and he'd just start leaning over and talking to us in English, and he was like, "Nunes, he is a madman. This fella is a madman."
Jude takes a bad half and makes it better for England. Mbappe looks poles apart from the competition, and Arsene Wenger finally sees something which most of us probably wish he hadn't. Later we'll hear from Gary Breen on his verdict in Japan's clash with Croatia this afternoon, as well as his comparisons between Damien Duff and Neymar. But first, Dan, another busy day, and we'll start briefly with that Wenger story, which may have gone under the radar for those of us looking to stick to football.
Yeah, so and I have to admit I wasn't at this event myself, but it was a technical briefing that Arsene Wenger gave, along with Jurgen Klinsmann. FIFA do these things sporadically during the competition. There's just various days where they do events in the media center, stats, various things, and Wenger was up today, and like, it was a Sunday morning thing. I'm not sure there was a huge crowd there, but he was being asked a couple of questions around various talking points of the competition, and one of them was Jurgen Klinsmann being asked a question about the short lead up to the competition. Had they seen anything, any lessons that can be gained from this? And Klinsmann gave an answer of some description, and then Wenger cuts in, sort of picks up on Klinsmann's point, and then basically says that what we are seeing is good results from nations, but not so much from those who were caught up in political protest. I don't know if you have the specific line in front of me, or they weren't caught up in political demonstration or words to that effect.
It was a peculiar angle to take, given that it was. I mean, you have the Germany incident, which is fair enough, but well, I mean, it's difficult to pin it on that. It's very difficult to pin it on that. I mean, it's just, I don't know why you'd expect a bit better from Wenger, but you do, really. It's a very strange thing to come out with, given that it's so obviously wrong and so fairly easily disproven, I would think.
Yeah, so the thing is with Wenger, just to be clear, people may not be aware of this, like, he's FIFA's chief of global football development. So he's on the books of FIFA. And I mean, previously, this isn't maybe a massive surprise to people who've been following him closely in the last 18 months or so, which wouldn't be everyone. Mm-hmm. Like, he would have sort of previously been a spokesperson for, maybe in favor of the biennial World Cup, which is like a terrible opinion. And I refuse to believe it's anything but that. And there's no doubt that the magic of the World Cup is that it's so rare, and that makes it so much more meaningful. And I mean, he's a FIFA employee, like, he's on the books, and maybe these are all his opinions, and he feels this way about everything. But this was a slightly unprompted comment, it must be said, that would be a little bit more like something you'd expect. I don't know, a front bencher to make in the Parliament, to sort of get a dig in that you're not expecting, or like something you'd have on one of our current affairs panel shows, where someone just decides, I haven't had enough slaps at the opposition here yet, so I better get one in while I can. And it was almost a little bit like it was on the agenda to get this in at some stage, and maybe this was the question that provided the best opportunity to do it. So I mean, I was sort of reading the comments. He obviously, we're all taking it from it that he's referencing Germany. Like, what was the line again? Sorry, I have it here now. Sorry, it's important maybe for people who didn't read it. Because he did speak bizarrely about England not being affected, and they were obviously very affected by the One Love and the protests and all that stuff before the first game. So he references, teams who have results in former tournaments, like France, like England, like Brazil. They played well in the first game. And the teams as well who were mentally ready, like Jurgen said, who had the mindset to focus on the competition and not on political demonstration. Now, it did cross my mind, right, that Iran were obviously caught up in a political episode as well too, and were hammered by England in that first game, and very different to sort of the FIFA politicking, just like, so, I mean, that's very, very, that'd be the kindest interpretation of Wenger's words in some kind of way. But nah, just like it didn't come across particularly well. But to me, like, massively surprising, given that he's sort of become a FIFA company man in the last period of time, which probably is disappointing for people who remember him fondly for very different reasons.
Yeah, he was only short of mentioning the word woke somewhere in there to just sort of tick every box on it. Maybe it was taking the knee at the beginning of the game against Senegal that gave England such a poor start, then moving on to on-pitch matters. I mean, it's one of those weird games with England where, everything's a disaster for half an hour and then everything's brilliant for the next hour, and it's somewhere in between again. And like, some of the moves they put together for Jude Bellingham was fantastic. Really took the game with a scruff of the neck and drove at Senegal the couple of chances that he got. Southgate got most things right, it would seem, in the result, and they move on. It's still, you still have that have they been tested thing, but like, they're into the last 8, and they have an awful lot going for them. I think they probably have as many questions around them as France do, which is what makes the game next weekend so interesting.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, I was at the France game, and you could definitely come away from the France game. You could find the negatives or you could find the positives, like, depending on what way you want to look at it. I mean, France gave up a big chance at 0-0. Zielinski from Napoli really should have scored. And there was one or two other little moments as well, in the same way that Senegal could have been ahead. Now, I think France still had a better grip in the game than England did in the first half hour. England were all over the place in the opening half an hour, really. And you do, again, like, you can come away with the positives or the negatives, right? So if you want to come away with the negatives, it's that Senegal causing a lot of problems in the first half an hour, and this is effectively a very diminished Senegal team, as we've mentioned before, with Mane being out, Idrissa Gueye as well. So, I mean, that they weren't bad opposition in that context. The flip side is that England, when they're good, they're sensationally good. Like, there was something exhilarating about the second goal in particular. I see Roy Keane is lavishing praise on Jude Bellingham, and okay, I know Bellingham maybe is a different sort of physical makeup. He's taller, right? But the thing about Bellingham is, like, he does have this great all-round package that you can see why Keane loves him, because, like, he's good in a lot of areas. He's strong, he's physical, but, like, almost deceptively good on the ball, or maybe not deceptively at all. Maybe it's very honest, very obvious to people. But that was a little bit of Keane, in a way.
Oh, very
too.
much so.
And particularly young Keane, right? Because this is number 8, Roy Keane. Like, Roy Keane was an attacking midfielder when he was younger, or a breaker, box to box breaking player. And who knows what Bellingham can become? But just the ways in which he was just executing some of those things, it does remind you a little bit. And people say Gerrard, and you can pick whoever you want. Like, you can, I think the compliment about Bellingham, I think Gary Breen said it in his column the week before last, that in modern parlance, like, he can be sort of the number 4 sitting, the 8 or the number 10, because he's such an all-rounder.
And the story goes that's why he wears the number 22, because you add all those together.
Yeah, that seems to be the story. Even though I thought the sitting midfielder was the 6, right? But clearly in English football parlance, it's the 4, because that's what Declan Rice is wearing, right?
Yeah. I always thought 4 and 5 are centre backs, but then that's old school 1 to 11, so I'm not sure. But, like, his role for the 2 goals, as you said, like, the first one, he's taking that run, he's driving into the box, he's looking up and he's picking the right pass and squaring it. The second one, where he breaks out of defence, a lot of players would have maybe thought to themselves, it's nearly half time, I've done my job with taking the pressure off the defence, I'll take this foul that the Senegal player is trying to foul, take a yellow card, but he didn't. Held him off, bounced off him, took a touch inside, played that pass with his left foot into Foden. Like, it was, and I think that switch is going to be interesting, where, he used Bellingham, Henderson and Rice. I think he'll do the same next week, because that allows Henderson and Bellingham to get forward as they did for the first goal, and, with Rice still sitting. Whereas if he only plays Bellingham and Rice in there, the 2 of them can't get forward at the same time. So, look, again, as you said, you can take the positives or the negatives out of it. I thought England on the ball and defence were poor, and if that is one area they'll definitely need to be better, because the chances that Senegal kind of had in there, you would definitely expect France to be taking them. But having said that, the couple of chances Poland have, you'd expect England to lose. So it's probably relatively even coming out of it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Like, and I'm sure we'll preview this game like extensively across the week. So we don't necessarily need to get stuck into it in too much detail now. But there's definitely like a lot in that. I think the thing about Bellingham, I love the left-footed pass, and it's what makes me think about sort of Keane in a way, right? Because you have players who are described as a good passer, and that they're flamboyant passers who like execute these through, but they're almost admiring it as they do, you know. But there was something like very instinctive and so effective about it. Like he got it out of his feet very quickly and got it away into the right place really crisply, you know. Like it was just something, brilliant. Like, you know, he was under a bit of pressure and he still was able to execute it, and that's sort of the impressive thing. But yeah, like Senegal a couple of times, like in that first half, as you mentioned, they just got down the sides a little bit of England as well too. And you're sort of looking at France thinking, right, what are they going to do? Well, like Mbappe and Dembele, sometimes they're hugging the touchline in some of these games. I'm not sure how it looks on the TV, like, you know. And then you're thinking, right, so big job for Kyle Walker, in particular, you know, or Shaw on the other side, and then Giroud comes and occupies them in a like the first goal for France, right? They were almost Poland were so obsessed with Mbappe and trying to anticipate Mbappe's movements that he actually just plays a very, very simple slide rule sort of pass for Giroud. And this is the thing, like how England deal with Mbappe is crucial. And also Griezmann has been quite deceptively good in this competition as well too. And he's sort of evolving even some of his work off the ball. And you'd imagine a big part of the France thing will be, okay, how do you use Griezmann? Like, who do you want him to occupy? Like, do you want him to cause issues for Rice? And then you have a situation where Mbappe, like, who comes across to help Walker with Mbappe? You know, there's a few little things. And what England play on the right of their the right of their midfielder, the right-sided attacker. Like, is it Saka again?
Probably Saka.
Does he have a huge job then coming back? You know, so even talking about it, as much as we said that a lot of people naturally would have been rooting for Senegal, you have to be delighted that it still is France-England now, don't you? Because it's going to be a great game.
Absolutely. It's going to be a belter of a game. But I suppose we've had four relatively one-sided games so far in the last 16. And after the break, Gary Breen is going to join us to explain why Croatia and Japan is likely to be far closer. Hi, Gary. Thanks for joining us again. Same question I suppose to open last time was, how are you enjoying the World Cup? It's been a bit crazier since the last time we spoke to you.
Yeah, it has. I'm really enjoying it. We talked about the build-up initially being quite slow, and you know, it's suddenly on you, the World Cup. But now it's really taken off, and more often than not, I get a bit more excited about the knockout stages of the competition, because you feel like the top teams are really going at it. Then it's the business end of it as such. But that last round of the group stages was just incredible. It was so exciting in terms of how the qualification looked like certain teams were going out. We've seen major shocks now with the likes of Belgium, Germany out as well. So the competition is really opening up, and these emerging nations are really giving a good account of themselves. I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far.
Yeah, I think the day with Japan and Croatia going through, they obviously play in the last 16. Yeah. I mean, they were both looking fine, and then all of a sudden they were both within one goal of going out. I think Japan in particular have been, it's strange to say, a surprise package given that they've turned around and beaten Spain and Germany, but they've been, if you like, everyone's second favourite team in the tournament if they didn't have a favourite team already. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's the way, Aidan, that they go about the game, because you know, that come from behind win against Germany was a major shock in terms of the competition. We think about the history of Germany and how strong they are in competition football. And then you see the performance of Spain in that first half against Japan, the total control. It was a masterclass, really, in terms of international football. And then you're thinking there's no real way back for any team, despite the fact that Japan are so like gutsy as such. But they came out in that second half. They literally adopted a more front foot style, and Spain just couldn't cope with it. It was incredible how, even when they got that goal to go into the lead, then you're looking at them sitting back and protecting that league. And I think for that period, they had something like 18% possession against a team like Spain. And yet I don't really remember Spain opening them up. It was such a masterclass in terms of that defensive structure. And it's all on the back of them, how hard they work together. Listen, we understand all that, but You still got to get your distances right. You're still up against elite level players. And yet Spain found it so difficult when asked to try and find that equaliser. I thought they were absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm. How difficult is it as a player when in a first half you've kind of dominated? And I know obviously in a dressing room, the words will obviously be said of, let's keep going like this. But in the back of your mind, there must be some temptation to say, look, lads, these aren't great and we'll be okay. And then suddenly at the start of the second half, this whirlwind comes at you. How difficult is it to cope with that? Or what do you do? Do you try and take a bit of time out of the game? Or like, is it something that you've experienced?
I think you'll know that in games in particular, like you could have all the momentum going your way and then something changes. It's very difficult to kind of really arrest that and get it back on side, despite the fact that there's such quality players, those Spanish, and that they really had the wind behind their sails, Japan, and it was difficult for Spain. And you're talking about one of the best teams there. And it was so refreshing because if you think about how passive the likes of Poland were against Argentina, it was such an uncomfortable watch. You think about Lewandowski up front, an iconic centre forward, a brilliant player, and he's just doing doggies. And they'll argue, listen, they've got through on the back of it, Poland, but that's not what I want to see. It's always a difficult challenge against these superpowers of world football, but you still like to think you can lay a glove on them. And my God, did Japan prove that. There were periods in that game where, although they were dropping deep on the edge of their box, Aidan, the energy, the verve with which they countered at pace and attacked in Spain, it looked likely that they could potentially get a third goal. A massive chance where the fullback bursts from deep, runs the length of the field, puts a lovely ball into the forward, and he just doesn't get a good connection. And you're just watching the game thinking, this is just what World Cup should be about. I loved watching it. At the same time, with 20 minutes to go, it looked like Spain were going out, and I was a little bit worried about that. I want to see Spain progress in this tournament. I was a little bit worried that some of the big guns were going by the wayside and a path was clear for some of the other teams still left in it.
Yeah, it's a little bit like FA Cup third rounds where everyone likes a shock until you end up with a semi-final of, two championship teams and low-ranking Premier League teams. You don't necessarily, even on a grander scale with the World Cup, you certainly don't really want that.
No, well, listen, ultimately, I'm looking at it thinking, I don't want England. I want England to be facing some of these top teams and make it a little bit more difficult for them. But yeah, listen, in terms of Spain going through, I think that's something we wanted to see. In terms of Germany and notably Belgium going out, fully deserved. I thought they were shocking, especially Belgium. And you just felt that throughout the campaign, there just hasn't been a harmonious camp. And when you're living together and you literally are in those World Cups, you have to get on, and you could just see something wasn't quite right, and it played out on the pitch.
Mm-hmm. And it was Croatia who eventually put them out. What did you make of them? They had a bit of a slow start in the tournament, and they've kind of started getting themselves going. They look like a tournament, kind of a strange phrase though, it can be a tournament team where they just get themselves together. What have we made of them so far?
Yeah, I think no real surprises. We've seen a lot of them over the years. You think about them getting to the final of the last World Cup, and we know about the quality certainly that they have in that midfield with Modric, Brozovic, and Kovacic as well. Obviously, Modric at 37. It doesn't look like he's aged, though, does he? It's incredible in terms of the ability that he's still producing, not only for Croatia, but for Real Madrid as well. So I always looked at Croatia. I like Croatia for some reason. I don't know what it is. I've always been one of those teams that I'll be looking to support. But it has been difficult for them. And they are an aging team. There's no doubt about that. And that is certainly a golden generation that we've seen over the last 10 years or whatever it is. But they're still in there. And you're right, Aidan. They're in there now. They'll be playing up against Japan.
Yeah,
the winners now. You're in the last 8 then. Anything can happen. And what you find about World Cups, more than anything, and more than about form going into the competition, more than about squad depth and quality, it's about momentum. That is what it is in tournament football, and it's whoever's got it. We've seen some of these emerging teams suddenly having a little bit of momentum and feeling good about themselves. But Croatia have been there, seen it, done it. So as good as Japan are, we know it'll be a tough game for them against Croatia. But Croatia at the same time will know, even if they take a goal lead, you have to put this Japanese team to bed, and that is not easily done. Yeah,
it would set up to be quite a clash of styles where, like, you wouldn't see these things. The old expression, styles make fights. Like it could be a great game of one team trying to keep the ball and another team chasing after them for the whole game. It might just depend on who gets the first goal. How do you see it going? Do you think Croatia might have enough?
Yeah, I think in terms of quality, I think Modric dictating play, and there's moments where when he just needs to up the tempo, he has that ability to do this. The concern for me, certainly, if I was prepping for this game against Japan, is the energy that they have within that team. Is that you'll be playing in the ball in good possession, and they're happy and they're quite content. They don't get embarrassed by not having the ball. They'll sit deep, the Japanese, and just suck you on, and then it's that counter at pace. Now we've seen that is something we see in modern football teams, how good they are on the counter, but they have that ability to put that real shift in defensively, put that defensive block up, but then be able to burst from deep and get up the field and be an offensive threat. So I think that's how the game's going to play out. But you're right. I think it's against, in the boxing analogy, it's someone who's going to keep jabbing, looking for that big opening. They'll have a good defence, a rope-a-dope style maybe, to whether or not they got that final finish at the end. But it's certainly an intriguing matchup. And
I suppose to jump across from boxing to sort of a different form of footwork with Samba football, we have Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
They've had they've been solid and occasionally spectacular. What have you made them so far? You know, with Neymar, without Neymar, what have you made them so far? They've had a couple of different games.
Yeah, no, I've liked them. I really have. And you're right. I think we think about Brazil and the flair with which they play. They're far more pragmatic now. And you think about it's 20 years since they last won. So their supporters are listening. They're thinking the time's coming. But I think the way they play now, you think about that really top Brazilian team. You think about Cafu, Roberto Carlos, giving you that whip from deep fullback positions. They don't play like that now. They've got such an abundance of talent in those wide areas that they've slightly changed it. The fullbacks now sit in and put up a bit of a more defensive showing. The defence is a good unit. I really like Thiago Silva. He's been a brilliant centre-half his whole career, still managing to do that. And with Casemiro in midfield as well, they've got real quality they have. And they literally are just saying now, okay, we've got this kind of back five in place. We'll back up play and we'll let you offensive players go and do it. It's not a case of everyone just attacking. And when they used to do this, you think about the drubbing they got against Germany in World Cups previously. That off-the-cuff type of football, it's just going to be put to the sword in modern-day football. And I think they look like a really organised team. I think they're going to go very close. And you're right to ask about Neymar, because there were moments, certainly in that Serbia game, where they were lacking a little bit of energy. Suddenly, he makes a burst. He drops a shoulder. He beats a player, and then suddenly it all opens up in front of him. And I think that they do have strength in depth. They do have players who can come in, as we proved where Neymar's been out injured. But you just feel that he's the one guy who can elevate them. And I look at the quality. The one thing I would say about them in those wide areas is that they need to be a bit more clinical than they have. You think of Vinicius Junior has gotten in a couple of occasions, Rafinha as well. It's a great goal-scoring positions, but they haven't been clinical enough. And I think as you go deeper into the competition, you have to take those chances.
And with a player like Neymar, like he divides opinion very much so in terms of. Can you think of someone who you would have played with, like who would have that kind of ability to do anything for good and for bad, and what it's like playing with someone like that? Like say Thiago Silva's obviously played with him a long time.
Yeah.
Like, does he just sort of say, "Oh, that's the way he is," or would he be at him? Do you think, or how would you deal with playing with a player like that?
Well, I to be perfectly honest, if I think about a player who can influence a game as much as that on a World Cup stage, it would have been someone like Damien Duff, who going into the deeper part of that competition in Japan and Korea was just playing a level of football that was just sensational. But the caveat that you have there with Damien Duff is that as good as he is going forward, he's just as good going backwards. He'll just as equally put a shift in for the team. So you don't really have to adjust it. You literally just feel to yourself as a player, as a teammate, get the ball to him as early as you can. With someone like Neymar, it's a difficult situation, isn't it, Aidan, in terms of the modern day footballer? They have very high opinions of themselves. I would expect that someone like Thiago Silva is able to communicate with Neymar. You know, they played together for so long with Brazil and with Paris, that you'd hope that he'd have that influence. But at the same time, you would hope far more than the histrionics that we see with Paris and to a certain extent with Brazil, that Neymar's determination is now to win a World Cup with Brazil, because as good a player as he is, you're judged on that as a Brazilian superstar. Did you win the World Cup? And if he don't win the World Cup, he's never going to be in that debate. And that is the frustration. And I'm sure someone like him who's aware of his legacy, we hear that word so often now, he'll be desperate to win a World Cup.
Yeah, and join so many of the greats.
Yeah,
Gary, that's been great. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully speak to you again before the end of the competition.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Aidan. Take care, mate.
So, Dan, Gary's expecting a close game in Croatia, Japan. Styles make fights. You've seen Croatia. How do you think they'll shape up against Japan?
Yeah, like it's a tough one to assess. I mean, I suppose I know you were saying to Gary about like, you know, they're a tournament team and maybe you're seeing them grow into the competition. But the flip side is, like, what was the second half against Belgium their worst half? Like, you could definitely argue that. And I know we've talked on it before that like they were maybe just they saw the finishing line there, so they just decided to dig in and get to it. And like, as I said, like that Morocco opening game wasn't that bad a game at all. You know, in terms of
As
maybe how it sort of has it panned out. But you definitely feel with Croatia that, like, look at the problems that Belgium caused for them. Now, that was actually by getting the ball wide and getting crosses in and having a bit of a presence. Like, they spread the game a bit, and like Croatia have got like so strong in those central departments with like Modric, Kovacic, Brozovic sort of sweeping up a little bit. Modric sort of roams around a bit. He's quite interesting to watch. Like, it's sort of like a Messi-esque thing in the sense that he has a little bit of freedom to pop up anywhere, that he can be split in the centre halves 1 minute to take the ball, and the next he can be pressing like at the front line, and like he has like a bit of freedom there. But you did sort of look at them and think, right, but you know, Japan will find stuff to work on. But Japan, as we saw against Spain, and you touched on it a little bit with Gary, that like they were just all energy and in your face. But obviously Croatia have good footballers who can drop back and probably play through a press. They have the intelligence to play through a press. You would think they have the skill set like to do that, you know. So I think this is, I mean, I'm going to it, so maybe I'm building it up. But like, we'll talk about Brazil and South Korea in a bit. You know, I still feel Brazil will get the job done there. Hopefully we'll have closer games from the Tuesday ones. We potentially will. But I think this one can completely go either way. I don't know if I have a really strong opinion about how it can go. Like, I definitely think that as much at the start of the competition, I spoke about Croatia refreshing their squad a little bit, and they've got like Guardiola at the back, who's like 20, 21 and clearly going to be a big player. They've actually stuck with a lot of the older guard, and you know, they've played a lot of minutes in some cases, and you kind of wonder, will Japan have a little bit of a freshness, and could they just outlast them across the piece?
Yeah,
you know?
It's funny. That's that kind of phrase that's coming into my head. The more I'm looking at it, the more I'm thinking kind of Japan in extra time, maybe. That I think Japan have used their substitutes very, very well, in that they're almost bringing them on for energy purposes rather than tactical purposes. And maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but they seem to have used them very, very well. The tempo
refresh.
just stays high. They refresh. And I think, you know, Croatia have some fantastic players. I love a lot of the players. They're brilliant technical players. But if you just have someone buzzing in around you for 90 minutes or an extra time, 2 hours, or God knows however long of extra time, it could be 2.5 hours by the time you add up the whole thing up. I just think Croatia's legs might give out on them. That if you have a couple of players in and around Modric, brilliant as he is and has been, I think that's the area they target. So I'd be kind of thinking maybe Japan in extra time. How about yourself and prediction wise?
I feel like Croatia need to win it in 90 if they're going to do it. Look, I think we're going to have the same prediction on the other game, I reckon. I mean, maybe I'll take Croatia to do it in 90 minutes, right? But I if it goes to 90, I'm flipping to your side. But for the books, maybe just like with Japan, it's a slight thing again where they have the hangover again, like, you know, to raise yourself up again. I kind of wonder. Maybe I'm trying to just really convince myself an argument for it. I think it's pretty close, but for the sake of it, I'll say Croatia, maybe just to be able to manage that energy with some of the quality they have in the midfield, to just be able to get around it. But it can go either way.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, we're both on the same page, probably with Brazil and South Korea. Brilliant and all as that breakaway was for South Korea against Portugal. In reality, I think it's a game they probably should have lost. And, you know, the other two teams in the group will feel, I think they could find themselves looking at this game against Brazil, wondering, like, particularly Uruguay, really, really having more regret again as to. I think Uruguay would have given Brazil a really strong game. I think Brazil will be too strong. I'll be looking at probably 3-0 Brazil. I think they'll be too strong.
I actually only last night when I got back, I only got to see that South Korea goal last night. Like, this is the thing, because the games aren't that visible around the place here. You know, you're not seeing like replays or stuff of every goal. I only got to see the South Korea goal. I mean, it's an incredible assist by Son. I don't know if we talked about it before. We probably didn't. Like, just the ability to be able to do that at pace. And I saw like a behind the goal fan video, and sometimes they can be brilliant, you know. And like it was magnificent, and the scenes afterwards and stuff. But like the pace he was traveling at, to see that runner out of his line of sight and to get the pace. I mean, it's really like people like use hyperbole and say, "Oh, that's world class," you know. But like that is world class. Like that is that's just like top drawer. But the
rundown from Hee-chan as well. The run from Hee-chan as well. We didn't. You're right. We didn't speak about it where. Like, he's going full out, 70, 80, 90 yards, and a slight slowdown just to keep himself onside and get on the end of it. It was absolutely, it is strange. It was one of the goals of the tournament, and something that seems relatively simple, but we got to try it. Like, it's a hell of a lot harder than it looked. It was brilliant.
Yeah, like I mean, it's just to appreciate the level of some of these guys, you know, and it's a very straightforward thing, but like just the doing stuff at pace. Even Nunez had one the other day. I know Nunez is like very divisive figure, and sort of a bit like erratic. And I was at the Uruguay game. It was actually I don't know where the bloke was. I was at the back row of the commentary, and he was commentating live on TV. But what they had was a rotating commentators, like BBC 5 Live used to do it, that someone would commentate for 15 minutes and they'd swap. But this guy, like, he was definitely speaking in Arabic, and like he was really full on intense. But then he'd take his break and he'd just start leaning over and talking to us in English. And he was like, "Nunez, he is a madman. This fella is a madman. He will get sent off in this game. He is a madman." And Nunez had this one in the first half. I don't know if people will remember it. He did a little clip over the keeper, and it was cleared off the line. It was a real pace again, and it was a really good effort. And this guy was next to go, "This guy is, I'm a Liverpool fan. This guy is terrible. You know, Salah, he needs to learn from Salah." And I was thinking, listen, you can have a go at Nunez, no problem, but he's after executing a chip at pace that was going in other than a brilliant clearance. This is like confirmation bias at work here. You know, not everything he does is crazy or terrible, just because he can be crazy and terrible at times. But I divulge a bit. I think Brazil will win. Digress even, not divulge.
Digress, it's been a long day.
It's whatever. Yeah, words. You know, just like we can edit all this stuff out, right? But no, I think Brazil will win. But I'm not sure if Brazil are a 3-0 winning type of team is the only thing, you know. I understand why you would reach that view. Will Neymar be back? And we touch on it again with Gary. It does seem like he might be and might give them something. But I take Brazil to win, but maybe just 1 or 2, maybe 2-0.
Well, hopefully a little bit closer than the last couple of games. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the game today, Dan. We'll be back tomorrow with the Indo World Cup. Watch us on independent.ie and YouTube, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks.